In this video, you're going to hear an account that completely changed my life. My name is Michael Carson, and I'm a commercial diver, accustomed to dealing with the dangers and isolation of the deep ocean. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I experienced 142 meters deep in one of the darkest and most silent places on Earth. It was there, at the limit of human survival, that I had an encounter that transformed my soul. What happened that day didn't just save my life, but rekindled a faith I thought I had lost. This is an intimate, true, and deeply moving testimony about courage, faith, and the loving presence of Mary, the Mother of Jesus. Before we begin, I want to extend a special invitation. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of the next videos. Every story here is made to touch your heart. Leave a like if this content inspires you in any way, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I'd love to know where you're following us from. May this story speak deeply to your heart. I never imagined that a routine mission would become the most inexplicable and impactful moment of my life. My name is Michael Carson, and I've been a commercial diver for almost 20 years, used to the silence and pressure of the ocean depths. I've worked on oil rigs, vessel salvages, and submerged structure maintenance. But on that specific day, everything felt a little unusual from the start. We were in the Gulf of Mexico, and the task was simple. Inspect a valve about 140 meters deep. The team was relaxed, the sea was calm, and I entered the water as I always did, focused, breathing deeply, without imagining I was about to experience something that would never leave my mind. The descent was slow and silent. The deeper I sank, the darker the water became. It's a kind of darkness that's impossible to describe in words. It's not just the absence of light. It's as if the entire world ceased to exist around you. All you hear is your own breathing through the equipment, and even that seems distant. At 142 meters, I reached the designated point. I turned on my helmet light and started to work, guiding myself with the map and the team's signals on the radio. But then, everything failed. First, it was the light. It went out of nowhere. Then, the radio. Total silence. And for an instant, I felt a tightness in my chest that didn't come from the equipment, but from something deeper. I was completely alone, trapped in the densest darkness, over 100 meters away from life. At that moment, the only thing I could do was try not to panic. At this depth, any despair can be fatal. My heart was racing, and I knew that the oxygen, while still sufficient, wouldn't last forever. I tried to restart the lighting system, but nothing happened. I began to move slowly, feeling around with my hands, trying to identify some point of reference on the structure. But it was all useless. The feeling was like floating in a void. I couldn't see the tips of my fingers. And then, for the first time in years of diving, I felt true fear. Not that technical, controlled fear, the fear of actually dying. Alone, in the dark, at the bottom of the sea, far from everything and everyone. I thought about my children. I thought about my wife. And softly, even with the respirator on, I began to murmur a prayer my mother taught me when I was a child. I didn't even know if God could hear me there, but it was all I could do. The light in the abyss. It was then that it happened. In the middle of that total darkness, a light began to form. It wasn't like the flashlights, it wasn't cold and white. It was a soft, golden, yet intense light. And the strangest thing, it didn't illuminate like a flashlight would. It was as if the light were alive, and little by little I began to see a shape, I could barely believe my eyes. A figure was outlined in the middle of the darkness, surrounded by this light that seemed to come from within her. It was a woman. She was standing, with her arms slightly open, her face serene, her eyes closed. She wasn't floating. She was there, as if standing firmly on the ground, even though there was no ground. I froze. Everything inside me fell silent. The fear vanished all at once, and what remained was something else, something I had never felt before, a peace so great that it seemed impossible to exist in that place. I remained completely still for a few seconds, trying to understand if this was real or a product of panic and oxygen deprivation. But the more I looked, the clearer the image became. She wore a blue mantle that fell to her feet, and the fabric seemed to glow softly, as if being touched by a light that didn't come from outside, but from within herself. Her face was calm, of a beauty that wasn't of this world, not in an aesthetic sense, but in the sense of conveying something no human expression can. It was as if every feature said, "Everything is all right," even without her speaking a word. And yet, I understood. I felt it. As if that presence was telling me I wasn't alone, that even there, at the bottom of the ocean, God knew where I was, and that she also knew. It was the Virgin Mary. I had no doubt. In that instant I simply knew. No rational thought explained it, but my heart recognized her. The vision lasted a few more seconds. I don't remember blinking. I only remember breathing slowly, as if my whole body had entered a state of suspension, but without fear, without urgency. She then opened her eyes. Dark, calm, deep eyes, as if they contained a silent eternity. And in that moment, I felt something that cannot be translated into words. It was as if a warmth rose from my chest to my face, as if a presence entered me. I began to cry. I was inside the diving suit, helmet closed, but the tears ran down anyway. The crying didn't come from fear. It was something else. A relief so intense I could barely breathe. It was as if, for a few seconds, all the weight I carried, grievances, guilt, frustrations, fears, had evaporated right there at the bottom of the sea. The rescue and the return. I don't know how long it lasted, because the notion of time simply disappeared. There was no noise, no communication, no natural light, just that presence before me. She didn't move or speak, but something inside me was rearranging itself, as if my soul was being adjusted from within. I thought of my mother, who was very devoted to Our Lady, and who always told me, "She will never leave you alone, son, even if you seem lost." And there I was, literally lost, in a place no mother could reach. No one, except her. When that thought came to me, something even stronger happened. An intense light engulfed me completely. My body was overcome by a serene warmth, and at that exact instant, I felt I was being sustained. Not physically, but spiritually, as if something invisible was holding me, protecting me, as if I was no longer vulnerable to that extreme environment. And that's when the light began to dissipate. Very slowly. The image of the Virgin became less clear, but not hurriedly, as if she were saying goodbye with delicacy. Her eyes closed again, and the glow around her diminished until only the darkness remained once more. But that darkness was no longer the same. I was still at the bottom of the sea, without a flashlight, without a radio, with no sign of the team. But the panic did not return. On the contrary, it was as if I knew, with a certainty that didn't come from logic, that everything was going to be fine, that someone was guiding me. And at that moment, something incredible happened, The helmet light turned on by itself, at full power. Then, the sound of the radio returned, full of static, with someone from the team shouting my name repeatedly. I couldn't even answer immediately. I just stood there, breathing deeply, trying to understand if all of that had really happened. When I finally answered on the radio, my voice was choked. The first thing one of the operators said was, "You disappeared from the radar for almost 5 minutes, Michael. What happened down there?" But how could I explain? How to put into words something so outside of any human logic? I just said I had a system problem, that everything went out for a while, but that I was fine now. On the outside, I tried to maintain a professional demeanor, but inside, I was completely shaken. I knew what I had experienced, and I knew I couldn't tell just anyone about it. Not at that moment. Maybe never. On the way back to the surface, as I slowly ascended for decompression, my eyes were fixed on nothing. I reviewed everything in my head. The light, her face, the peace. The certainty that I had been visited by something, or rather, by someone, that is beyond what human eyes can understand. A silent transformation. When I reached the platform and took off the equipment, the crew noticed I was different. One of my colleagues even commented, "Man, you look pale. Are you really okay?" I just nodded, trying to smile. But the truth is, I was still digesting everything. I took a shower, sat in the changing room, and stayed there alone for a few minutes, head down. I felt as if I had left a part of myself down there. And perhaps I did. The part that lived on autopilot, that didn't believe in anything beyond what the eyes could see. For the first time in many years, I felt like praying, not as a ritual or a desperate plea, but as a gesture of gratitude, of surrender. I took the rosary my mother had given me years ago, which I kept stored in my bag more out of habit than faith, and held it in my hands for a long time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the cabin looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the platform engine and the occasional footsteps in the corridor. As exhausted as my body was, my mind wouldn't shut off. I closed my eyes and saw that face again. I remembered the light, the feeling of warmth, the silence that wasn't empty, but full of something sacred. I spent hours trying to rationalize everything. Did my mind play a trick on me? Was it a delusion caused by the pressure, lack of oxygen, or stress? But no. There was something about that experience that was more real than any other moment of my life. It was as if my soul had seen, and not just my eyes. And that part no one can take from me. It's hard to explain this to someone who has never been through such an experience, but I know what I saw. And moreover, I know what I felt. The next day, still offshore, I went to talk to the technical diving supervisor and tried to bring up unusual experiences that could happen in the depths. He looked at me somewhat suspiciously and said, "Look, I've heard it all. People seeing shadows, hearing voices, even having hallucinations of flying. But that usually happens when the person is about to lose consciousness." I didn't argue. I just stayed quiet. But inside I knew that what I experienced didn't fit those explanations. I was conscious the whole time, lucid, and above all, at peace. No hallucination in the world would bring that peace that enveloped me. It was as if the Virgin Mary was there for a reason. And the strongest part was, she didn't say anything. She didn't make any miraculous gesture, but the mere fact of having appeared saved my life in a way that no one will ever fully understand. Life after the encounter. After we returned from the mission, I stayed home for a few days, in silence. I didn't tell anyone in the first few days. Not my wife, not my friends. I didn't want to seem crazy. I also didn't want to force an understanding for something that clearly went beyond human comprehension. But one thing started to change in me. I noticed it in the little things. The impatience I used to have in traffic gave way to a kind of calm I had never known. I started to notice people on the street more, the details. I went back to entering churches, something I hadn't done since my early 20s. I would sit in the back pews and stay there, just observing the stained glass, listening to the prayers, smelling that scent of old wood and burning candle. And whenever I closed my eyes, her image returned clearly. It wasn't a memory. It was a presence. It was as if she was still accompanying me. One day, unable to hold it in any longer, I told everything to my mother. She is a devout Catholic, one of those who pray the rosary every day at 6 in the evening. When I started speaking, my voice trembled. I thought she would think it was an exaggeration, or that she would be suspicious. But in the middle of my story, she grabbed my hand tightly, her eyes welling up, and said, "You had an encounter. She saved you." And at that moment, everything clicked. It was as if I had been waiting for that validation to accept that, yes, I had been touched by something sacred. She hugged me for a good few minutes, and then gave me an old booklet with Marian prayers that belonged to my grandfather. Since that day, I've started reading a different prayer every morning before starting the day. And I've never entered the sea again without making the sign of the cross. I needed to acknowledge where that deliverance came from. Going back to work after that wasn't easy. Every dive began to carry a different weight. I continued to do everything with the same technical precision as always, but now there was a new silence in me, as if I was always waiting for something. Not for another vision, but for a sign, for a confirmation that experience hadn't been an isolated chance occurrence. On one of the following missions, upon reaching 100 meters of depth, I felt a slight pressure in my chest. It wasn't physical, it was emotional. I remembered her image, the way her eyes pierced me, and a tear flowed even with all the equipment. I was no longer the same. I could no longer see the ocean only as a work environment. It became, for me, a sacred place. A space where something eternal manifested for a few seconds. A submerged altar, hidden from the eyes of the world. I also began to realize that it hadn't just been for me. The peace I now felt made me a different presence in the lives of the people around me. My children commented that I was more affectionate. My wife said it had been a while since she'd seen me so serene. And work colleagues, even without knowing anything, came to talk to me about personal things, as if they knew I could truly listen. It wasn't anything supernatural. I was still the same Michael, but with a new inner disposition. A faith that didn't come from a church or a book. It came from the direct experience with the inexplicable, and that's why I still hesitate to tell this story publicly. Because it's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about what no one can take from you, even if the whole world doubts it. The testimony. One day, a few months later, I went back alone to the exact spot of that mission. It wasn't part of any job. It was personal. I rented a small boat with company authorization and went to the exact coordinates with the GPS. I didn't dive to 142 meters, of course. It would be dangerous and reckless to do it alone. But I dove as far as it was safe and stayed there for a few minutes, just looking into the void of the water. I closed my eyes for an instant and imagined she was there again. I didn't see anything. I didn't feel anything supernatural. But it was different. I felt as if that was enough. As if it didn't need to happen again, because what had already been lived was sufficient to transform me. I returned to the surface in silence, and for the first time since childhood, I knelt at the edge of the boat and prayed out loud. I didn't ask for anything. I just gave thanks. After that day, I started writing down what happened in a notebook. Not to publish or to show anyone, but not to forget. I wrote down the way I remembered it, with dates, sensations, details. Some nights, I would wake up and jot down things that had come back in a dream, small memories of her face, the light, the water temperature, the sound of my own heart. The notebook was getting full, and I realized that, even if no one ever believed me, it was recorded there, and inside me. One day, who knows, I'll leave this account for my children. Not to convince them of anything, but so they know that their father lived something that completely changed the way he saw life. Something that cannot be explained, that cannot be sold, that cannot be proven, but that is real. Real as the water, as the breath, as the silence of the deep sea. A curious thing began to happen after that dive. Whenever I saw an image of Our Lady, in a church, on a rosary, even on a simple print on someone's wall, my body reacted. Sometimes it was a slight shiver. Other times, a sudden urge to stop and simply look, as if that symbol had gained another layer of meaning for me. Before, I saw it as a religious representation, something beautiful, respectful. But now, it was almost like seeing a photograph of someone who saved me. The first time I entered a chapel and saw an image of Our Lady of Graces, I stopped for over 10 minutes, standing, looking. The blue mantle, the serene glow, the closed eyes, everything reminded me of what I saw down there. I can't say if it was the same representation, but I know that figure started to be a part of my life in a very intimate, almost silent, but always present way. There was a moment, months later, when I was invited to speak to a group of beginner divers at a technical school. It was just to give safety guidelines, share some field experiences, that kind of informal talk. But in the middle of the speech, someone asked, "Have you ever been through a situation where you thought you wouldn't make it out alive?" Right then, my heart raced. I stayed silent for a few seconds. I thought about lying, telling some random technical case, but I couldn't. I took a deep breath and said, "Yes." And that time, it wasn't technique that saved me. And for the first time, even in a summarized way, I told a group of people what had happened. No one laughed, no one mocked. Some were moved, others just listened in silence. But there, in that moment, I felt that maybe my story wasn't just mine. Maybe it had also happened to be told. After that day at the technical school, some of the students came to talk to me privately. One of them told me he had lost his father at sea years ago, and that my story had calmed something inside him. Another said that, although he wasn't religious, he felt an urge to know more about Our Lady. I didn't want to force any belief, much less seem like I was preaching. But I listened to each one attentively, and answered with sincerity. I said he didn't have to believe everything I said, but that was my truth, and that sometimes what we experience isn't to convince anyone, but to remind us that there are things greater than us. I left there with a strange feeling, as if that testimony, even contained, even simple, had begun to fulfill a purpose I still don't fully understand. Maybe I never will completely understand. But I know it wasn't in vain. The light within. Some nights I still dream about the deep sea. But now, the dreams aren't of panic or despair, like before. They are calm. There is always silence, darkness, and a distant light. I never see her face clearly again, but I always feel that same peace, and I wake up with a light heart, as if I had received a silent visit during the night. I don't know if this will last forever, I don't know if I'll ever experience anything similar again. But one thing I learned: there are experiences that divide our lives in two, before and after. And since that day at sea, I've never been the same. My faith ceased to be an idea and became a presence. And every time I enter the sea now, I carry with me not only the equipment and the technique, but also the certainty that even in the darkest places, someone sees me. I've been asked if I would go back to that exact spot where everything happened. And honestly, I don't know. Part of me feels that that moment was unique, that it shouldn't be touched again, as if it were a sanctuary that isn't repeated. But another part misses it, not the fear nor the darkness, but that presence, that certainty that went through me without needing a word. Because, since then, everything in the world seems a little lighter, even on bad days. It doesn't mean everything became perfect. I still face problems, doubts, pains like anyone else. But that experience gave me something I carry every day: a silent conviction that I am not alone, and that there is someone from above or from the depths who watches over me. And just that changes everything. It's enough. Sometimes I wonder why it happened to me. I wasn't a man of faith at the time. I rarely prayed, rarely went to church, and was much more focused on work than on spirituality. But maybe that's exactly why it happened. Perhaps that's how God acts. He takes someone at the bottom, in the most literal way possible, and shows that grace does not depend on our merit, but on His mercy, and on the intercession of the one who loves us as a mother. I have never doubted Mary's presence after that. Not because I read it in a book or heard it from someone, but because I saw it with my own eyes. And what is seen with the heart, no one can erase. Sometimes, the greatest revelations don't come with thunder, nor with voices from heaven. They come with a soft light in the dark, and a peace that silences deeply. I have never told this story publicly until today. The few people who heard it were those I felt would understand without needing proof. And, even now, sharing this, I don't do it to convince anyone. I just felt I had to tell it. Because, since that day, one thing remains. I cannot explain what happened. I didn't see angels. I didn't hear voices. I didn't have any scandalous revelation. But I saw what I saw. I felt what I felt. And that transformed me. I've thought about asking a priest or writing to someone from the church. But every time I think about it, something inside me says, "You don't need to." That was between me, her, and God. And that's all that matters. Sometimes when people ask me how it was exactly, I don't know how to answer. I just say, it happened. Just as the sea can be calm, and suddenly an immense wave appears out of nowhere. That's how it was. Out of nowhere, everything changed. And then it went back to normal, as if nothing had happened. But I never went back to normal. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all. It wasn't just an apparition. It was a calling, a rescue, a silent reminder that, even in the darkest and loneliest depths, the Mother is present, and that when everything fails, when the light goes out and the radio goes silent, even so, someone sees you and reaches you. This story taught me that faith does not depend on place, religion, or merit. Sometimes God acts in the most improbable moments and places, even at the bottom of the sea, to show that we are not alone. Mary's presence was the sign I needed to never doubt it again. And now I ask you, have you ever experienced something you can't explain, but that changed your life forever? Tell me here in the comments. I really want to read your account or your opinion on this experience. If this video touched your heart in some way, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon, because here we share real and inspiring stories that strengthen faith and renew hope. And if you enjoy this type of content and want to support the channel, click the Join button down below. It's a simple and direct way to help us continue bringing transformative stories like this one. Click on the next video that will appear on the screen. Another impressive testimony is waiting for you. May God bless you, and see you in the next video.